Here we go. So Zineb, are you ready to go? I'm going to turn it over to you. Whenever you're ready, you can just go ahead and take it away.
That sounds great. Thanks, Peter. And thank you for inviting me. Such a pleasure to be with the community of kindred spirits who are trying to change education. Um, okay, so I'd like to start by telling you two questions that we've been exploring quite a bit with my team, which are what if young people designed the future of education? And how might we enable them to reclaim their education? A couple weeks ago, we had our first youth by youth prototype where we gathered 140 selected youth activists aged 15 to 25 and from across 50 countries and over 3 days to explore specifically those questions. So on the first day, we discussed the what is of education from its history to its innovations. On the second, we went on a radical reimagination journey, exploring what if and creating new visions for our education. And on the last day, we explored what now and what steps we need to take to make our visions a reality. So, through this process of researching and discussing with incredible youth activists and advocates from across the world, I've come to strongly believe that the only way we can transform our education systems at scale, globally, and rapidly enough is through a youth led, adult supported revolution of our education. And in this mini talk, I would like to explain to you a little bit why that is. So, in order to do that, I'm going to be exploring four questions. The first one is going to be what is our vision for education? The second, how do we get to this new vision of education? The third will be what are the benefits of a youth led education revolution? And finally, we'll be exploring why now. And before delving into those questions, I would just like to clarify what I mean by the term education, because I certainly don't think education means schooling. Schooling is the institutionalization of our education, but it's far from the only place where we learn and get educated, as I'm sure many of you are fully aware of that. Um, and I love the John Dewey quote about education, which says, education is a social process, education is growth, education is not a preparation for life, education is life itself. So when we talk about young people leading the process of educational change, I mean both in schools, but perhaps more importantly, outside of schools and in their lives, including how they consume information, and in particular social media, and how they decide to spend their time. And here, emphasis on the word decision, because a lot of time spent is actually through manipulation of their time. So without further ado on terms, I would like to delve into the first question, which was, what is our vision for education? And I personally think the starting point to defining our vision for education is answering the question, what kind of society do we want to live in? And who do we need to be and become for that societal vision to be possible? And there's a book by Zachary Stein, which I highly recommend, called Education in a Time Between Worlds, where he says education is the human making function of society. So, what kind of humans should we make? To reform education, we have to reform our vision for humanity and for humans. So, a potential vision for humanity, I think we can all get behind, at least theoretically, is a vision where human potential is unleashed and liberated to allow us to actualize our individual and collective potentials. So, a flourishing society would be one where every person would be able to rely on strong foundations, such as climate that sustains life and healthy communities, upon which to build a fulfilling life and determine one's own path. And so, for that societal vision to be possible, our education should enable us to have the ability to inquire, create, contribute, and feel a sense of belonging to the communities we're a part of. Educational processes should lead us to become self directed, lifelong learners. And the goal of education would then be the flourishing of individuals for thriving societies. So we would be able to realign the goal of society with the purpose of education. Because unfortunately, and as I think a lot of you know in this room, we need to acknowledge that the logic behind our education system is actually currently exploitative, both to humans and to the planet. And our current education systems are shaped by what is called the reductive human capital theory, which means that the main function of education system is to supply the economy with the next generation of workers. And so that kind of, yeah, the reductive human capital theory literally means that we reduce the human to its monetary value. So the way our school system sees us is as a commodity and as a market value to them, to the companies as employees and as consumers, to governments as taxpayers and as contributors to the perpetual growth objective that is essentially causing the collapse of our climate systems. And I think we also need to take a step back and acknowledge that the social fractures we're witnessing today, whether we're talking about biodiversity loss or polarization or inequalities and climate change, are a direct result of the way we have designed our education in the past. I just want to ask you, like, if you think we would have tolerated the way we willfully destroy and mistreat entire species, ecosystems, and peoples if we had been educated to care. And what does it say about our values as a humanity that we're currently in the midst of a sixth mass extinction caused by humans and that 8 men own the same wealth as half of the planet? These outcomes are a byproduct of an education system that is teaching us to ruthlessly compete with one another's for notions of personal success, and I say personal success, over our collective interests and well-being. And so I think it's essential that we be driven by a new vision for our education, a vision that carries us out of civilizational collapse and into a new form of human civilization capable of taking care of our planet and ourselves. And I would just like to quote Zach Stein again, who says, the core task of education today is to confront the almost unimaginable design challenge of building an educational system that provides for the recreation of civilization during a world system transition. And quite a task. So with that, I want to lead us to the second question, which is, well, how do we get to this new vision of education? I hold a strong belief that education needs to go through a metamorphic process, which means a transformation from the inside out through young people choosing and demanding new ways of getting an education. There are, I think, two main reasons why I believe a youth-led revolution in education is the key element to a potential transformation of our education systems. The first one is that historically, it did take people awakening to their rights and demanding them for a large system to truly transform. So for instance, the first two large democracies, the USA and France, were movements by the people for the people. They shone a light on the possibility of a new way to govern and be governed. And from there, they led to a movement of democratization across the globe. And I think in order to see a genuine transformation of our education, we're going to need a similar awakening by the main population education is supposed to serve, which are young people. And the second reason is that, as I previously mentioned, there's a misalignment between the goal of schooling, which is the reductive human capital model, and the goal of people in society, which is individual and societal flourishing. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that this misalignment is not about to go away. So individuals and communities have to reclaim their education and exercise agency over their education if they want to put their personal and collective well-being first. And I just also want to underline that agency over one's education is actually a legal right, according to the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is kind of ironically one of the the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history, and which states in Article 11 and 12 that children have the right to be heard and should be considered in policymaking regarding their education, which I think we all know is currently not applied in most places. And so those are the main reasons. But on top of that, I think it's also important that we acknowledge that young people are at a point where they've lost trust in the adults in charge. They know that their futures are being mortgaged right now by the adults in decision-making power positions. And I think they're starting to understand and realize that as it stands, they will be spending their lives dealing with the messes created by the generations before them. And I love this quote by Greta Thunberg, who said in one of her speeches, "Why should I be studying for a future that soon may be no more, when no one is doing anything to save that future?" And what is the point of learning facts when the most important facts clearly mean nothing to our society? If you still say that we're wasting valuable lesson time, then let me remind you, our political leaders have wasted decades through denial and inaction. Yeah. And I think, yeah, Greta and the young people she inspired through the Fridays for the Future movement are actually learning much more by getting engaged in the civic process and demanding more from their government. There's this, again, like John Dewey quote saying that I believe that the only true education comes from the stimulation of the child's power by the demands of the social situations in which he finds himself. And so I think Greta and the young people are doing, like, are actually getting a true education. They're rising up to the challenge of their time by deciding that actually standing up for the right is more important than going to school to learn facts that will not necessarily serve them. Um, and I know that, yeah, like it would be a really extraordinary feat for humans to transform our education systems. And I genuinely believe young people are capable of achieving that through global solidarity and with the support of adults who believe in protecting their rights and giving them agency and in serving their needs. Um, which leads me to my third question: is that actually beneficial to them? And if so, in what way? Um, so my argument is that the youth-led education revolutions actually would be very beneficial to young people, to education at large, and to society. So starting with young people, a youth-led education revolution starts with the re-owning of our education at the individual level, which is the most empowering thing young people can do for themselves. It enables them to become lifelong learners. It improves their readiness to adapt to an increasingly unpredictable future. And it is in alignment with their physiological needs and their brain development. And I can post a few papers on that as well. And it contributes to their overall well-being. In the book, The Self-Driven Child, the author states, without a healthy sense of control, kids feel powerless and overwhelmed and will often become passive or resigned. When they are denied the ability to make meaningful choices, they are at a high risk of becoming anxious, struggling to manage anger, becoming self destructive, or self medicating. And I think that in light of the youth mental health crisis we're faced with, we start to understand why there is that mental health crisis. If you take agency away from young people, it is no wonder that they're going to be struggling with those issues. And so by joining a collective movement for the liberation of their education, young people address their needs for connection, for belonging, for exploration, and for purpose. They empower themselves and they regain a sense of control over their lives. And I think it comes also by notably redefining what success means to them. Now, on to the benefits for education. I think that a lot of people realize that school systems in most countries are massively inefficient bureaucracies. And I personally don't think they're capable of changing rapidly enough to accommodate the planetary crisis and transitions we currently face. Bureaucracies move very slowly, but people can move fast. So lots of globally connected, locally driven, youth-led movements would generate real change at a much faster pace and in a way that is contextually relevant and addresses the unique sets of challenges young people find themselves in. It would enable us to address educational challenges at the level at which they are happening. And on top of that, youth involvement in their education would help address one of the school's biggest challenges, which is youth engagement and motivation. And I think, frankly, everyone knows that most young people are bored in school, and that apart from a few great teachers that know how to create a spark, most of students' learning does not actually happen in school. So by enabling young people to influence and transform their education, we support their growth, the development of their autonomy, which is the key to their motivation. Um, and we also give them the experience they need to become effective change makers now and in the future. And so the last benefits that I want to address is the benefits to society at large. And I would would like you to imagine what if the next generation of young people that graduated from schools and universities were self-driven, aware of the opportunities and challenges of our time, and equipped to positively impact the world around them. The ripple effects of that would be incredible, and it would take our society in the direction that we need to go to. It would make for a society of civically engaged adults with a sense of responsibility and who would be contributing to the health and resilience of their communities. And I think we know that like issues of social justice and democracies are not distinct from acts of teaching and learning. And our collective emancipation and liberation is a function of our ability to reclaim our education, to reclaim what we intrinsically care about, rather than notions of success that are indoctrinated in us. It's our way back to what is most precious about our humanity. Um, and with that, I would like to go into why now. Uh, well, firstly, I think it's absolutely essential that we realize it is the time for us to engage in a radical planetary transition. And education has a central and essential role to play in that planetary transition. Um, in his recent TED talk, climate impact scholar Johan Rockström, which I highly recommend that TED talk, by the way, it's on TED Countdown, made really quite painfully clear that we only have about 10 years to transition the whole world to a new logic of modern prosperity and equity within planetary boundaries. As it stands, and now nine out of 15 biophysical systems that regulate the climate are at risk of reaching tipping points, which could make Earth uninhabitable for humanity. So I think it's clear that it is our coexisting generations' role in this very peculiar time in history to enable this planetary transition to a sustainable and resilient civilization that embraces collaboration and collective well-being over competition and individualism. And this transition cannot happen without the transformation of education. And fortunately, through the youth climate movement, we have already started to see that young people have the capacity for global solidarity and have the will and ability to stand up when faced with this existential threat. Secondly, COVID-19, I think, has laid bare the lack of resilience of our schooling system to mass disruptions, which we know mass disruptions are likely to happen more and more in the future. This unprecedented disruption forced the governments, schools, teachers, parents, and young people to reimagine school overnight. And although this mass experiment left many behind, it also opened the way to truly challenge education systems at a time when education is effectively being forced to change. And I think you would agree that education innovators, researchers, academics, and philosophers, and now many parents as well, have been agreeing for decades that education is in dire need of transformation. But unfortunately, this general agreement doesn't seem to create or hasn't yet created the impetus for systemic change in education. And so the fact that there is this massive disruption means that there's a golden opportunity for us to seize and push the transformation agenda that has been left on the bench of education systems for all these decades and years. And finally, the time is now because we have the technological infrastructure and communication infrastructure that can enable global access to alternative choices, notably through online learning and through access to information about alternative learning opportunities in person and online, which I think Joe's talks earlier speaks to that quite well. Technology and information means that we now have more ability to decouple our schooling and our education. For instance, imagine if you could create a portfolio based on your learning at school, online, the experiences in your communities, the experiences you have with organization. We could start recognizing all of the different ways we learn and have much more agency over our educational choices and the ways to engage in the world around us. So to wrap up, the technological revolution, the COVID-19 disruption, and the urgency of the planetary transition make education ripe for unprecedented transformation, with young people at the forefront and with supportive adults at their side. So let's seize this opportunity and challenge our education systems globally by empowering young people, by creating new narratives and visions for ourselves, and by uniting our forces across disciplines and geographies. Thank you very much. And I will just post in the chat a petition that we've created, which, yeah, I would invite you to write, a link to join the movement if this is something that you'd be interested in, and my contact information, as we're personally, yeah, always looking for collaboration. I think this work is made through co-creation, and it's important, as I said, that we actually unite our forces in order to create that systemic change that we've been so longing for. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. We might be able to sneak in a question or two here. Actually, I have a quick question. So I know that you and a couple of your colleagues just put on this amazing conference, what, like 3 weeks ago? Do I have that right?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
A couple of weeks ago. Can you tell us, like, really quick about that and how you managed to get all of these young people to engage?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is that we started by really looking for youth activists, youth advocates, youth organizations that believe in the same thing as we do, and then start sharing that message with young people, and then got actually overwhelmed with the number of applications. And because we wanted to have a setting where we had small group conversation and it was very like relational, we actually decided to select a smaller cohort as a starting point for our first pilot, um, to make sure that everyone has a group that they can interact with. And we've also co-created the conference from the beginning with a group of youth activists, um, which enabled us to create small group cafes and have trained youth facilitators to have that conversations. And I think just a few things that came out of this is that it came very strongly, one, that young people were craving this kind of connection and alignment around the sense of purpose. Two, that a lot of them were really surprised to see the extent to which the challenges they're faced with are similar across borders. So for instance, one of our facilitators who's from Nigeria told us, well, I was sure that Nigeria has had a terrible education system and that no one could compare. And I ended up empathizing with my American fellow who was facing a lot of the similar challenges that I never anticipated. I think that's why the sense of like global solidarity between young people is so important. Um, and yeah, like there's a lot of other things about Youth by Youth that I can say, and then we're still very much in the reflection process. But it, yeah, to me, it was a very incredible experience to put young people together and see what happens when we connect them around something that truly matters to them, and gives them another option than the one they're currently presented with.
Zineb, that was a great presentation. And there were so many things that you said in there that are very similar to some of the things that are going to be in the talk that I'm giving at 6:30 today. So I hope you're going to be there. One of them includes the plan to pilot Project A, exactly what you talked about, a digital portfolio, as opposed to a high school diploma, which means nothing other than your bum was in a seat for a certain length of time. And so I'd love you to see that and collaborate and talk further. So nice to meet you, and
That'd be great.
Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Looking forward to your talk.
Thank you. It was amazing. My question is, for all of the non-youth people who are here, we all want to help what you're talking about to happen. What can we do? Like, all of us with all of our different communities and our different hats, like, what should we do?
No, absolutely. First, I want to start by saying that for me, this work is absolutely and completely intergenerational, and the reclaiming of our education happens at all ages. And that indeed it's about like that support to young people as well, and because we know that they're going to be the one needing to lead this change. So I think there's a few things related to Youth by Youth that I think anyone can get involved in. First is we have this advocacy campaign and petitioning where we explicitly ask all education ministries to have youth councils, where we ask for all education policies to be approved by young people before they get implemented. We want to also like advocate for the creation of youth task force addressing some of the specific COVID-19 challenges, such as youth mental health and widening inequalities, and very much working for starting to recognize outside of school experiences as fully part of our education. So those are some of the ways we're currently campaigning. We're also creating a cohort of mentors that we want to start connecting with young people and giving young people the tools to create action circles locally that would be globally connected. So we're currently creating a list of like resources and prototypes with young people in different places, such as in Devon in the UK, in Gaza, in Palestine, and Colombia, which are widely different contexts. But for how, what resources they need in order to start recruiting other young people, finding adult mentors, and start the process of reflecting on their education first, and then deciding what they will do collectively in order to influence their education systems. And I think there's lots of things that are going to keep coming. So I would love if like anyone who's interested in partnering, we're always looking for co-creators and allies in this work. And so, another way is like discussing all of the ways that things cross, because I think there's so many ways that our works are actually interrelated. And as long as we see our initiatives are as siloed and separated, I don't think we're going to have the momentum in order to create that systemic change we're talking about. So really hoping to see also more collaboration come up from this. And we keep saying in all our emails to young people, we sign with, we are the ones we've been waiting for. I think we need to stop waiting for people to come save us and start really building that personal agency and responsibility in order to change the systems we want to change. So definitely fully agree with that.